am muting me. Oops. I'm muting me now.
All right. So, as usual, another fun topic. I love sweeping through history from a biblical standpoint because really I think it's the best explanation for everything that we're seeing out there. So this morning, we're going to talk about World History Part 1. This is the very first one because, you know, people think that Genesis 1 is the first piece of information we have about history, but actually before Genesis 1 comes Revelation. It's actually Revelation 12. So that's what we're going to look at. You know, you might be tempted to think, well, you know, how can we even know something about the pre-flood world, much less something about before time began? But actually, the Bible is very clear about what happened. And it is burst out throughout the whole Bible. There's a little bit here, a little bit there. There's some in Ezekiel, some in Isaiah, some in Revelation. So we're going to get right into it. That the Bible reveals that there was a war in heaven. Revelation 12:7 starts off with, and there was war in heaven. What a loaded phrase. War in heaven. I mean, what's that all about? Well, if there was a physical war, and there probably, you know, there's indications that there were, we know definitely it was more than that. That there was there was words, intrigue, a power struggle. And that's where we're going to begin if we want to understand world history. The entire Bible basically is explaining that there's a war going on and that God and you, we have enemies. So who would be stupid enough to be God's enemy? Well, Revelation 7 continues on, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So let's just stop there just for a second. Like, wait, what? Michael who? Fought against a dragon? Well, the cool thing about the Bible, and the first thing that we're going to learn about the Bible, is that it will explain itself. Sometimes in the same chapter or passage, other times it might be in a different book of the Bible. But if you don't read with preconceived ideas, the Bible will be more than capable of explaining itself to you. By the way, the Bible does go into who Michael is, but for the sake of time, we're going to skip that and pursue who the dragon is. So let's continue on. Verse 8, Revelation 12:8. So the dragon and his angels, they fought and they prevailed not. Neither was their place found anymore in heaven. So basically, they were kicked out. Revelation 12:9 continues. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So let's stop there for a second. So God's enemy, the dragon, excuse me, and serpent are explained. So again, you don't have to guess. The Bible says that the dragon, the serpent, and the devil are all Satan. It's just different terms the Bible uses. And again, this was example where it explained it in a nearby verse, and other times you might have to hunt a little bit, but will explain itself if you ask God to make it clear to you and use those fun marginal references. If you're not familiar with you know, Bibles, I have one that has a center column down through between the two columns, and that center column has a bunch of little cryptic looking verses and stuff. And it's really, I tell you, this is one of the funnest things to do. It's not academic and boring. When you're reading along in the Bible and you see a little letter like A, B, or C, and you follow that over to the center column, it'll tell you, oh, well, check out this verse and that verse if you want more on that particular little story or subject or whatever. So it's a great way to find out for yourself what a passage is like. You don't even have to, you know, go to college or look up all these things online. Just take a Bible with references like that. Make sure it's an easy to read one like the New King James, and you'll have a great time exploring these topics. Okay, so wait a second. There's actually a devil? You know, it's interesting. The polls vary somewhat, but they basically about 50% of people don't believe that there is a devil. And if they do, they think he's some kind of red being with a pitchfork, antagonizing subjects in hell. But that's not actually what the Bible says. Well, what does it say? Well, 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, and it's in a passage where it was warning people to be careful, to be on guard, because you could get fooled by things out there. And 11:14 says, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Basically, the Bible is just saying here, and it gives examples elsewhere, where Satan and his angels are able to take human form. They're able to masquerade themselves and their ideas as good things. And so 2 Corinthians 11:15 continues, therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness. So it's possible for seemingly godly men to be preaching a false gospel. It's possible that, you know, seemingly good people in schools, or, you know, people living next to you on your street, there's wrong ideas that Satan has a lot at stake to try to pawn off on people. So, and we're going to see, just because somebody, you know, is a good person with a bad idea doesn't mean that there's some demon possessed person or something. It's just that Satan has a lot at stake to try to pawn off these bad ideas on us. But just the takeaway from this little section here is that the first thing we find out Satan is capable of doing is preaching. So I think it's important to delve into why do bad things happen? Because I don't have to tell you that, you know, rape, murder, incest, the whole kit and caboodle of stuff out there, you know, people blame it on God, and they don't have any kind of context for, I mean, if there was an all-loving, all-powerful God, why did these things happen? Well, again, to understand history at all, the biblical standpoint best explains it, because it helps us to see the war that's going on and who the players are. So we're going to read Job 1-5, chapter 1, verses 1-5, and then we're going to skip to verses 13 through 22. And it's a really important section to see. So I'm going to take the time to read that quick. It's a fun, very good story. So it's definitely not boring. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him, and his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat with and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, and according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. So Job did regularly. Okay, so if we had just that, you know, we'd have a nice little family. This is somebody post-flood. We'll see that in a minute. We can tell that time period by something interesting that happens in the story in just a second. So let's skip over to verse 13 and finish the story. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burnt up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating. I can just imagine at this point what's going through this guy's head. No, don't tell me. Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked have I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Okay, You got a really amazing story here. And if this is all we had, we would think, no, wait, this is way beyond horrible luck. The first thought most people have is, dude, you know, is God mad at you? Did you do something like bad? The first thing that we tend to do is blame God. But we have verses 6 through 12. And this is a fascinating section. So let's read that. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This is a fascinating and, I mean, precious passage. It's so important. God felt it important enough that he wanted very early on in Earth's history for people to know who really is to blame. So in Christ's time, he's still trying to cure people of this idea that if something goes wrong, either you are naughty or God is angry at you. Because you remember the story of the man that was born blind, and the disciples said, "Master, who sinned that this man was born blind?" And basically that underlying question under all these stories is, who really is God? I mean, you know, they say he's loving and the Bible says he's loving, and I hope he's loving, but you know, is he as loving as I really need him to be? Or, you know what, you know, these bad things that happen, I mean, was that him? So the Bible takes time to make sure that you understand who the players are in this thing. So God's trying to reveal himself all through the Bible, is trying to save as many people as he can, and Satan trying to make you think God is mean and never quite happy with you. But this, you know, this story pulls back the curtain and shows us, and we're going to delve into it just a little bit more before we go on, but it pulls back the curtain and shows what's going on. Now, most of us who have horrible things happen, like, you know, again, your spouse dying in a car accident or your kid dying of cancer, we don't normally get the curtain pulled back the way Job did. But if this is the only, quote, curtain that's ever pulled back, this personally would be enough for me. I don't need to understand the difficult things in my life, because I have the curtain pulled back in this story, and I can see, you know, who loves me and who hates me. Okay, so let's go on to Job 2, and it's verses 1 through 10. Very interesting addition to this story. So again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." Now it's going to be interesting. It makes it sound like God did it, but in a second it will clarify. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he's in your hand, but spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd, which is basically like a little piece of his pottery, with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So notice a couple of things. In verse 3, that odd little thing where it says that he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. Notice God takes ownership of what he could have stopped, but he allowed Satan to actually do. So God's big enough to take the blame. He understands we don't get it. There's just a lot of things that people don't understand, and they'll blame God, but he's okay with that for now. But in reality, although he allowed it, there's very good reasons why, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But notice also in verse 7, Satan struck Job with severe health problems. So are all natural disasters and health problems from Satan? No, sometimes storms, maybe weather patterns, and with health, we often bring on on ourselves from horrible diets and no exercise, stress levels, not sleeping well. And then we blame it all on God. But there's many verses to comfort us with the fact that no matter what we go through, whether it is from Satan or whether God's allowing something to teach us a lesson, or from our own stupidity or rebellion, that God still has this and has the ability to help us through it. So let's go on. There's one other little tiny snippet that I want to give you from Job 4 that fills out the rest of the story. So Job 4, it starts in verse 12, but we're just going to kind of go to verse 15, I think. Well, let's go to 12 quick. Now a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it. In disquieting thoughts and the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then a spirit, let me go here, go down to the next one. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair on my body stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. Let's see, let me go on one more here. That way you can see it. There was silence. Then I heard a voice saying, can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? So let's finish out. If he puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed before a moth? You can literally almost hear the resentment in Satan's voice. I don't think this was one of his angels. I think Satan himself did this. There was too much at stake. Obviously, we saw that he was the one involved earlier, a couple chapters before. So you could hear the resentment. God didn't trust us. He accused us of error. Who are you to think you can be acceptable to God? Satan's lies are most successful when we're hurting, tired, weak, struggling financially, going through difficult times. That's when we have to be on our guard the most, because make no mistake, he is out to destroy your faith. All right, so let's go on to Mark 5, 2 through 9, because we want to kind of get an idea, well, how many, Satan and his angels, well, how many are there? Is there any kind of clue with this? Well, Mark 5, 2 through 9 has a very, very interesting story. It's another one of those cases where the Bible pulls back the curtain and gives us a glimpse at the what's going on behind the scenes. So Mark 5, verse 2, and when he had come, this is Jesus, when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he'd often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. Then he saw Jesus from afar and ran and worshiped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. For he said to him, come out of the man, unclean spirit. Then he asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. All right. So Satan can't do everything by himself, but unfortunately he has help. So in verses 2-9, we find out that there's a guy that is cutting himself, crying, and in miserable emotional and physical torment. And when Jesus, asks him what is his name, and by the way, there's multiple times in the Bible where God will ask a question, making it look like he doesn't know, whether it's Jesus or God, God the Father. But he knows he's doing that for our benefit so that we can see, what people respond. It helps pull back the curtain. So anyway, this is a situation where when the angel answers, or the demon answers and says, my name is Legion, for where many. Legion means thousands. It's typically like 3,000 to 5,000, I believe, are in a Roman legion. So there are thousands just in this one man. If Satan can spare that many just to plague one guy, I think he has plenty of them. So there's a lot more we can get into with that to flesh this out. But, we've got a Bible study series on, topics like this that we can get into later if anybody wants. But basically, notice that there are people that cut themselves today with emotional trauma. Now, I'm not saying everybody that cuts themselves or that has depression or anything like that is demon possessed. The concept is that Satan will traumatize people. Again, when we're down, we're struggling, maybe our parents are divorcing, or, there's just different situations where we struggle, and Satan's there to impress in all of its horrors on us. And people are driven to things like this. But Jesus is the answer for these things. All right, so to recap so far, and we're almost done, but so far we found out that Satan and his angels are preaching, deceiving, they're killing or hurting people. Because if you pick apart that story in Job, it's very interesting. They killed or hurt people. They are capable of causing natural disasters. They're capable of causing depression or not measuring up. That was what Satan was trying to do to Job in chapter 4. When during the night, when that spirit was hovering around him, he was trying to break his hold on God, trying to destroy his faith, trying to say that you couldn't be loved by God. You're not enough for him. If we're not enough, you're not enough. They're capable of causing emotional trauma and cutting. And again, there's a lot more that we could get into in the Bible about stories of angels or demons and how they are involved with world history. But that will be touched on in other presentations. What I've been working on with Bible Land Studios, which is kind of the more spiritual side, and for people that want to delve more into beyond creation and evolution and kind of go through history from a biblical standpoint, I've got 52 presentations that are either completely done or in the process of being done. And we will hit more on these subjects of what angels and demons are doing in history. So you can join in on those if that's an interesting topic to you. Before we finish, there's two things that I want to do. And one of them is go to 2 Kings 6, 14 through 17, and just recap a story that's really interesting. So in fact, it's one of the most beautiful stories in the entire Bible. So 2 Kings 6, 14 through 17. So just to give you the background of what's going on in this story, there's basically Israel, and there's also a naughty king. And there's this, by naughty king, I mean an enemy of Israel. And he wants to, damage or destroy Israel. And so he keeps trying to send his armies, against Israel. But every time he goes and sets up his army, basically there's a prophet in Israel. God tells the prophet, oh, go warn the king of Israel. Don't go there or do this or do that, so that they're protected. And so after a while, the enemy king gets fed up and says to his people in his court and the people that surround him, who's the snitch? So that's kind of behind the scenes. So let's look at this. Let's see, verse 14. Well, actually, let's go up to verse 11, therefore the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing, and called his servants and said to them, will you not show me which one of us is for the king of Israel? And one of the servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elijah the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he said, go and see where he is, meaning that prophet Elijah. Like, find out where that dude is. I want to get him. And he says, so that I may send and get him. And it was told him, saying, surely he is in Dothan. Therefore, he sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night, surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God, so this is Elijah's servant, when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. About that moment, I'm thinking that servant's going, I don't see anybody else here except us. Us two against a great big army, and I'm kind of petrified. And in verse 17, and Elijah prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open the eyes of that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elijah. So you can read the rest of the story there, but I just wanted to point out that just as clearly as the Bible reveals that Satan is relentless in his attacks, it also reveals that God is relentless in his protection, his watch care over us. So just because you can't see God's resources on your behalf doesn't mean they're not there. There is one problem, though. There's a lack of belief that allows us to experience a lot of the blessings of God. There was an interesting little verse in, I think it's Matthew 8:13 or 13:8, somewhere around right there. And it says, talking about Jesus, and he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So in that particular city, he didn't do very many healings or miracles because of their unbelief. We can limit the hand of God. So, or we can unleash the hand of God by our faith. So just because we can't see the protection around us doesn't mean he doesn't have more than enough ability to protect us or to solve our problem, whatever difficulty we're in. So the final thing I wanted to cover was principles of war. This is an odd little section in Deuteronomy, and there's so much beauty in the Bible that people just miss over. They're skimming along, and they'll see something like this. Deuteronomy 20, the heading of it, if you've got a heading in your Bible at the beginning of some of the chapters and stuff, it says principles governing warfare. And immediately people go, start in like great big snooze fest, I mean, principles of war, what does that have to do with me? Warfare, actually, it says. So this is actually God teaching Israel how to fight their physical battles, but also teaching all of us how to fight our spiritual battles. And it's an extremely interesting set of little verses here. And this is what we're going to end on. So when you go out to battle, this is verse 1. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them. For the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So shall it be when you are on the verge of battle that the priest shall approach and speak to the people. And he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of a battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. And do not be afraid. Do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Now, this is a fascinating little thing, because if you're not familiar with who maybe Moses and Joshua is, Moses was the man that God used to lead everybody out of Egypt. Joshua was the commander of the army. And in this passage, not only does God say multiple times, don't be afraid of your enemies, but he also says that when they're on the verge of the battle, to have the priest go and say this. Now, this is kind of odd. And it's very interesting, actually. He didn't ask Moses he didn't tell Moses to go speak to them, even though Moses was, would have inspired confidence because he was the one that led them out. He didn't have Joshua as commander of the Lord's army say it. He had the priest say it because he wanted them to know, because the priest represents Jesus. He wanted the priest to do it because he wanted us to know, I've got this. This isn't about Moses. This isn't about trusting in his abilities. This isn't about trusting in Joshua, the commander of the army, or their abilities. This is about trusting in me and my ability to lead you out of the most powerful nation on earth. Literally took a nation of slaves and waltzed them out of the most powerful nation on earth. And he wanted us to continually know that on the verge of our battles, whether it's you not having the money for your mortgage, or whether it's you know, a job situation with people that are just on your case, you know, and persecuting you, or whatever, he's got this. And we know the end of the story, basically. So God wins. That's the end of the story. So basically, that's it for now. This is basically just a beginning introduction to the war in heaven. It, again, the next presentation, number 2, is on what are angels. And we're going to get into this more. And then from that point forward, we'll just see them show up in various ones of the 52 presentations. But that's it for now. So we'll, I guess, let John go back to doing everything. And
all right, thanks, guys.